Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode of Demystifying Money. I am joined by my friend and fellow CFP, Donna Kendrick. She is the founder of Septon Financial, and after losing her first husband suddenly in 2013, she navigated widowhood with 3 young children, and this inspired her to help support families in transition using financial planning and those steps to kind of be better prepared for all of the situations that sometimes life brings our way. She's the host of the Wisdom and Wealth podcast and author of A Guide to Widowhood and A Guide for Blended Families. Thank you so much, Donna, for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me, and my compliments. I love all the goodness that you put out there through your podcast and your books and your financial planning work. Very impressed, and thanks so much. I want to be like you.
Ah,
This episode of Demystifying Money with Misty Lynch is proudly sponsored by Soundview Financial Advisors. Visit www.soundviewfinancialadvisors.com to learn more.
I think I love that you know what, and I think that's part of, what we do is a lot of times that the work that we go into, it might not be what we thought we'd be doing when we were little kids but it's like our life kind of pushes us into a certain direction where we feel like maybe I can help some other people. Maybe I'm going to share my story because maybe some other people feel the same way. So even just, writing your book and sharing your personal experience, with losing your husband in 2013. I mean, that's deeply personal. So how has sharing that deeply personal have helped you,
Yeah,
when it came to shaping your business?
you know, in a ton of ways, when I wrote the book the first time, I remember writing it almost like an autobiography,
Hmm.
like part of it. And the other part of it was like almost like a very quick help guide for widows and in
Hmm.
those first 3 years. And I remember merging the two with the urging of my publisher and my editor saying, no, tell your story, because then people can identify with the fact of the advice you're giving comes from what you lived through as well as what you've learned.
Hmm.
And I was like, well, this is great because now I only have to tell my story once in the
Months.
pages of the book and I'm done, right? So we shared a little bit earlier before the recording that I did lose my first husband and he had taken his life. And for the longest time, it was nothing I shared. I would just say he died suddenly and I would just keep going
Mhm.
for many different reasons. So I was like, oh, if I put it in the pages of the book, then it's done. I don't have to say it again. Book
Mhm.
hits, podcast interviews, clients coming out, speaking events, and I'm sharing that story more now than I ever did because it's relatable, right?
Mhm.
Because whether it was a suicide or a heart attack or even an illness that you knew somebody was facing, their strategies are kind of the same. And the
Yeah.
broken heart at the end is kind of the same. So here you are making those decisions for finances with a broken heart, and
Yeah.
it's tough.
It's definitely, no, it's difficult. And I think that I've worked with people who are, have experienced loss, and like, there's only so much we could do when we plan. And I think even on the last episode, when I was talking about, natural disaster, I mean, we can plan as best as possible, but then we are also dealing with having, having to make decisions under pressure, under stress, having, those such an emotional experience as well as trying to figure out the next logical step. So I'm curious, when you first wrote your book, you focused on the first 3 years. Was there anything in particular that made that time, period specifically important to talk about with other people who might be going through this?
You know what I really thought was needed to be said is like the permission to slow the roll, right? Like in the book, I mentioned there's like 3 different stages in my mind. The immediate decisions that have to be made, like when you lose a spouse, sometimes you have to put in the documents for Social Security. You have to put in the documents for life insurance. They're time sensitive. There's no quite choice on that. You
Mhm.
might actually lose a window or a window might close to seek some benefits. So you have to do those immediate things. And really knowing what are those immediate decisions and then what else can we kind of put on pause? What can we put in a holding pattern? And what can that be a decision of those transitional years? Maybe after we call it the year of the first, right?
Mhm.
The first anniversary of the loss of our spouse or the first
Mhm.
the first Valentine's Day, right?
Yeah.
So once we get through that year and then we start to make some more goals, right, that are more long term, And then year three and out, like that's when you can actually start to dream a little, right? Because you've really lived for 2 years. Life now as a sole parent, right?
Hmm.
Or on your own financially, and you start to really feel it, right? And now that you're in those shoes, do they fit? Right? What else can we be done? I think it's a little hard from, when we do a traditional financial plan, it's like
Hmm.
where we are now, where do we want to go, and what are our hopes and dreams, like magic
Hmm.
wand at the end. There's no magic wand at the end or a hope or a dream really for someone who just lost a spouse.
Right.
They're out there, but
Hmm.
they're not solidified, they're not concrete. So I
Yeah.
think being able to slow that roll and take it in chunks and giving yourself permission to curl up in a ball if you need to that day, right? But
Hmm.
knowing what has to get done, really
Yeah.
important.
No, that's true. It is so important. It is different. You're right. When we do a financial plan, or we're sitting with a couple, we're going out to age 95 and we're talking about all of, I mean, this is kind of in that, none of it. We have no control over all of it. But I think that there are certain things that, like you mentioned in that first year, that have to get done. And that's almost there might be checklists for that. There might be people who can do that. But I think that getting to that point where you are able to maybe see maybe not the future you imagined, but a different future that could still be good.
Yeah.
That's the difficult part, I think, for some people to understand that that's there and that's possible. Even people who go through divorce or other changes where the whole, what they pictured isn't going to be reality. And I think that could be tricky for some people to start to figure out how to get past those feelings or that pain. So, what are your thoughts there when it comes to, you've also talked to people about, your guide for blended families. So obviously your family has continued to evolve and change. So, what are your thoughts there about feeling giving yourself permission to think about the future or dream?
Yeah. It has to happen at some point in time, right? And I love to say we want an option to dream, right? We kind of want to know the framework of where we are financially and of our goals. And then it's almost like do you remember? Oh my goodness, I'm a little older than you, my love, but we used to have these books and you could choose your own adventure. Like
Mhm.
turn to page 135 if you want to go to the island. If you want to stay put on the boat, stay here.
Mhm.
That's almost like what I want my widows and my blended families to feel. I will be very honest. I was very stubborn about not wanting to get married again. I would live in sin just fine, right? And feel as if I was married, but not really getting married because I was really, really afraid of being vulnerable financially, right? And being responsible for taking on another family or another spouse. I had my own little block there, right? And it took a little bit of while, and it took a little bit of being in love to realize that this was something that we
Mhm.
could do. And even though I'm a financial planner, I had done it on my own for 10 years. And
Yeah.
I really wasn't willing to share the decision making. I was
Mhm.
okay sharing the money. I was
Yeah.
not okay with sharing the decision making.
Mhm.
I really enjoyed it being my way and my direction. And it took a lot of conversations, of sitting down, of mapping things out to get me even comfortable with this joining
Mhm.
of families and joining of funds.
Yeah. No, that's interesting that you mentioned because you're right. Sometimes we do get used to things the way that they are, that they have been. And you've been doing, obviously with three children of your own, you were doing 10 years of the work and the
Yep.
planning. And so I think that's interesting to bring up that, yeah, even as somebody who is trained in this profession, like there's a little bit of control, there's a little bit of anxiety when it comes to
Yeah.
those combinations. So you're not, if you feel that way, you're not alone. You're not crazy or selfish. And you're a completely normal person with a normal human brain that is like, but this has kept me alive. And I've
Mhm.
had to adjust. And now something new is a little bit scary. So
Yeah.
I think it's great to, mention that it takes time
Yeah, and
and
we
that
did
it
a
takes work.
really good visual, right? Like I
Mhm.
remember getting, and let me preface this. My new husband, Jim, got married 2 years ago. Lovely guy, completely different money mindset, right? Like I am saving till
Mhm.
long life,
Yeah.
94, 95. And he's like, ooh, if I make it to 70, that'd be great, right? I'm like, oh, wait, husband number two, let's not do this, right? But he very much lives for the moment. And
Mhm.
so he had to really understand where my brain was and why I was nervous, right? And so we mapped it all out. And of course, he was probably just sitting there being like, does this make you happy? You take over the dining room table. Go ahead with your giant flip chart. Have a
Yeah.
good day. But
Yes.
I really was like, wrote down like assets and wrote down flows of income and wrote down some of the goals for the kids. More than anything, it was the goals for the
Hmm.
kids and really identified what was mine, what was his, what was theirs, and what was ours. And we kind of went from there, from those categories, and started to build out what I called the new plan. So,
Yeah. No, and I think that sometimes, well, really, I mean, you can have a different money mindset than your sibling that grew up in the same exact household and the same exact conditions. It's always different. But I think that what you mentioned about him kind of letting you have the living room. And like
yes.
I've talked to some people and I could see couples and they're just like, I let her have the spreadsheet or he puts up this whole PowerPoint and I'm just like, yes, but it's almost like that's part of the compromise. That's part of the love piece is understanding like, yes, we might come at this from a different angle, but if the goal is the same in
Yeah,
the end, which is usually the kids,
it was.
your future, the things you want to do, that there's definitely different ways to approach it. And it's giving people their space to actually work through it the way that they do. And
Yeah.
I think that's just I think it's just something that people assume like one way is right or wrong.
Yeah,
I
and I
think
would get like, I would be like, okay, I just need you to humor me a little bit.
hmm
And once a month, let's sit in and we'll go into our portal and I need you to know where everything is. If something, God forbid, happens to me,
hmm
right? Because yeah, I'm a financial advisor. I run the finances in the house, right? And he's the creative one. God bless him.
hmm
Um, and he does a lot of everything with the kids. He
Yeah.
he just does. He's that sweet role.
hmm
And just that once a month sit down was too much for him. So to make myself feel better, I went to the executor of our will, the person that has
hmm
power of attorney over me finance. It's not him.
Yeah.
And I was like, how about I teach you all of this? So if something happens, you can take care of Jim. And she was like, oh man, she's friends with my husband. I was like, yeah, yep, it's you. She's like, oh my God, I love you both so much.
Yeah.
This is a true testament. And I
Yeah.
sat down with the will and all the estate documents and I showed her and all
hmm
the finances and I showed her and I felt satisfied. Someone knows it was not him. Okay. She
Yeah.
does.
No, and I
Okay.
think that is one thing that I feel like even in our role as financial planners, going outside of our own lives, is sometimes there might be one person who is not very engaged in the planning process or really doesn't enjoy it. And like we typically all meet, but sometimes it is just nice knowing like for the person that is really concerned that somebody else in the world knows what's going on and can help. Because
Yep.
it's very frightening to feel like, and we've all seen situations where somebody maybe didn't know
Yeah.
what their spouse had, where anything was, and having to learn that later in life or under stress is very, very difficult. So, what are some of the biggest challenges that you feel like some couples can maybe tackle now that you've seen, because there are some financial difficulties, obviously, that come with losing a spouse. But what are some of the big ones that you feel like sometimes it's really just it's self-care to get on board with
Yeah,
the
I mean, let's just get to the very basics of it. Even if it's not the larger who takes care of financial
Mhm,
decisions and awareness, let's make sure we know where everyone's passwords are, right? Like, are you using an online password aggregator, right?
mhm,
Do you know the keys to get into their phone, right? Like we were joking
mhm.
about it. Like so many times I have a password and it sends the code to my phone,
Yeah.
right? So my husband's just like, oh yeah, I'll never remember your code. So if something happens to you, I'm grabbing your finger and putting it on there for like the finger identification and opening it all up. I was like, oh, that's sweet, right? But even knowing that, I think we're in Pennsylvania, there's a power of attorney for digital assets
Mhm,
to make sure that you can get into that information. But if it's even just that conversation of, all right, let's organize our passwords so something
mhm,
happens, we're on board,
mhm.
do that, right?
Yeah.
Do that.
I think that's an interesting one, and it's true because then, unfortunately, I'll see, people who pass away who it's celebrating their work anniversary on LinkedIn, and you're always like, oh gosh, like because nobody really maybe is in control of their digital assets, or there's like all of these things that kind of you don't really think about it, but it's very hard to access information.
It can be.
And I think we think it's easier than it is if it's not yours and it's not you signing in. So I think that's just one approach, even to just get okay, this is everything that I would sign into or that I have. And even if that is with the attorneys, like a digital power, something like that, I think is really, really important. Because a lot of times, a lot of the things that go to unclaimed property or things like that, I'm guessing somebody just didn't even know that they
Oh
had
yeah,
access to.
100%. When my first husband passed, and I took care of almost all of the everyday
Mhm.
finances. I knew where everything is. And so that wasn't that heavy of a lift
Hmm.
for when he passed. But there were so many things that we never talked about. Like when we opened up his nightstand, he had a big key ring full of keys. To this day, I don't know what the keys were for. I'm
Yeah.
like, did he have a storage unit somewhere?
Hmm.
Because we moved international that I didn't know about, like,
Hmm.
or were these work keys? Like, I have no clue. And
Yeah.
and they must have been important to him because they were in his nightstand. Like,
Yeah.
so where were those things? And I
Hmm.
kind of use that example, and the keys are here in my office because I
Hmm.
use it with my own clients to be like, okay, where are these assets, right?
Yeah.
Like, where do you find about the employer benefits? Everything's in PDF nowadays. It's not like so many of us, like, hey, I still have paper files. I'm
Yeah.
just that person, can go to the file and be like, okay, that's my
Mhm.
Johnson and Johnson employer benefits. It's on a PDF
Yeah.
on the portal. It's
Right.
not there anymore. And we're
Yeah.
all comfortable with that. But how do we educate our spouse and our loved ones or our kids, the next generation, as to where it's going to be? It's a
Yeah,
big one.
no, that's very true because a lot of times I'll try to look up benefits for clients and I'll be like, I can't get past this
Yeah.
portion without signing in and seeing it. And so it's not that visible from outside to know what could potentially be there. So I think that whole piece of even, yeah, just that organization side can be so important. And what were some of the other things, when you had three children, young
Mhm.
children at the time, what were some of the other big financial, you know, issues that you ran into that either were easier to deal with because of the planning or that were difficult that people could potentially look out for?
I think a lot of it was in making sure once assets moved over into my name, making sure that I had the beneficiary designation
Hmm.
up to date with those, which is IRAs, things like
Hmm.
that, new life insurance policies, because so many things I was the beneficiary for my husband, he was for mine, right?
Hmm.
And so that was just it wasn't hard, right? And it was a checklist to go through. But again, you have to access each portal. You get tired of it or you don't want to deal with it. And so you put it off. Like,
Yeah.
please don't put it off. Like as soon as that paperwork comes in,
Hmm.
update all of that, go through my former employer retirement plans, make sure that beneficiary was updated away from my late husband and to my
Hmm.
children or to the guardian.
Yeah.
That was a big one for me. I think the biggest one for me, and I'll go there, like I was not a financial advisor when I lost my husband. I was trained in
Hmm.
finance and statistics, became a financial advisor after his loss. Um, but we didn't have enough cash reserve on hand.
Hmm.
We were in between moving houses. He moved very often, like a military life.
Hmm.
And so we had bought a house and hadn't sold one and used all of our cash to put a deposit on the second house. So when he passed, we really didn't have any cash reserve. I couldn't even pay for his funeral. I actually had to put the life insurance policy up against the funeral. So when life insurance came out, funeral home got paid, and then the life insurance
Hmm.
came to me. And I also did not have a lot of credit in my own name. I was an authorized user on many of his credit cards. And as soon as you report that someone passed, you close down their line
Hmm.
of credit. And I was left with not a lot of credit to be able to support life with no income and no life insurance
Hmm.
that was getting held up because of the payment process. That was tough. And that sent me into a feeling of lack and being scared, being
Hmm.
vulnerable, which lasted well into the first year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's important to realize because a lot of people, especially if they say that, maybe the credit cards aren't joint, like there's an authorized use, and then I think they don't realize that that is gone or
Yeah.
that will go away, and uh, that can be definitely complicated, especially if there's not enough cash or money on hand that you could liquidate easily. And luckily, you did have an insurance.
I did.
Because another thing that sometimes is avoided is talking about proper life insurance, because it's uncomfortable to talk about. Same with estate planning. I will see some hesitation for some clients who just don't, they know it's on the list of things to do. It's one of those things that's not, there's no real pressure to get it done. It doesn't hurt to not have it done until it's too late and you needed it. You know, that's when the
Exactly.
people who've been executors or who
Yeah.
have done that, they're the ones that are like, I'm getting this done because I am not putting somebody else through that. So I think that is something that, people should really pay attention to as their family changes, as their needs change, their real estate, all of those things, and make sure that it's enough.
Yeah.
Because we really don't know. Obviously, we don't know how long, any of us are going to be here, but I think it is one of those things that is just, we know that at some point, hopefully our children will outlive us, and I think that that's just one of those things that um, really can't be stressed enough in our work is just to make sure that those things are taken care of.
Yeah, when I share my story with some clients or maybe a new prospect that just kind of got referred to me, um, and I'm like, hey, do you know my background? Right. And I need to share it with you, even if it's just a highlight of I
Mhm,
became a widow, flipped my career on its head,
mhm,
and now this is what I do because I'm going to harp on financial planning and cash
mhm,
reserve. I'm going to harp on life insurance,
mhm,
and I'm going to harp on estate documents because
mhm,
those are the three things that protected me in those days. So I just talked about that lean few month
mhm,
period, right? But the reason we had life insurance because my husband and I did work with a financial advisor in our young 20s before
mhm.
we sold our first home and moved abroad. It was that financial advisor that got us the life
Yeah.
insurance. It was that financial advisor who made sure my estate documents were intact before we traveled to Italy, and to see what decisions could be made for us if we lived internationally and
Mhm.
something happened to my husband. Like those were really sensitive topics
Yeah.
that he threw in front of us and was like, he's law enforcement.
Yeah.
We're getting some life insurance. Let's
Yeah.
go.
Mhm.
Um, and I will
Yeah.
always be thankful for that.
Mhm.
And so that is really one of those key pillars of what I do was the advice I got that protected me. So I love that
Yeah.
you bring that up.
Yeah, and I think that that's it's important to share your story, and I think that it's probably going to be the thing that helps your clients, even knowing going into it, this is something that I care about. And I've seen that with other people who have shared deeply, personal experiences, like some of the one estate planning attorney I know, she almost lost her life in childbirth, and she's very adamant on guardianship. And I think that's just kind of what makes us, it compels us to do what we're doing.
Yeah.
Because, like you said, sometimes these conversations are uncomfortable and unpleasant, but it's like it, it's enough to get past that
Yeah. I've
when we
often
know how
said
important it is.
to someone that's been on the phone, like, okay, I kind of do financial planning different. So I'm going to like mommy you.
Mhm.
Like, and if you're not comfortable with that, then I'm not the advisor for
Mhm.
you. I will give you a recommendation to some other people, but I am in your business.
Yeah.
And I am going to be like step by step, being like, did you do it? Did you do it? Did you do it? But that's my approach because I need to sleep at night, right? I
Yeah.
like a nice 7 to 8 hours. I do. I hit 50 and I hit the wall. Like that was it. Like, and now we're six kids. Maybe that's what did it. Like
That's a
14 to
lot.
22. Oh my.
Right.
But
Because we do think about it. And some of us do think about it. Some of us might not, but I was talking to somebody who was like, okay, like when do you want me to decide? And I was like, well, very, quickly, because if we're gonna work together, like I'm gonna start making sure that these things are getting done.
yeah,
And I just need to know if we need
I'm
to
already
reserve some
worrying
space in
about
my
you.
brain for this, or if you're moving on, because I just have to have an answer. Because it's hard to make people do anything. But I do think that sometimes it helps if people are with the right person, to say like,
Yeah.
okay, well, if I don't want to do this, but Donna really wants me to do it, we'll get it
Yeah.
done. Because
Yeah.
sometimes we
And
don't do things for ourselves because we kind of are like, oh, move on, or maybe I should pay for this instead. So I think having that person that kind of, is also cares is can
yeah,
kind of be slightly motivating if you're somebody that puts off taking care of yourself. You
as
might need a
many of us
mom.
do.
You might need a mama to come in and help you. I wanted to talk about your blended family because I do think that that's
Sure.
something that is a whole different certainly common, and I think that it's just a kind of adds a different layer to financial planning. And some people are looking for like what's the right way to do it. And I don't know if there's necessarily a right way, but what are some of the things that you think is important for, couples coming together with maybe they have businesses, children already in the picture. What are some tips you have for those couples to do things in a
Yeah.
smooth way?
And blended families come in all different shapes and sizes, right? Like
Hmm.
sometimes it can be a very committed relationship, but you don't formally get married, right? That's a whole different consideration than like Jim and I, who did get married
Hmm.
2 years ago. When I say different consideration for things like who's in charge of the kids if something
Hmm.
should happen to me, who has rights to make decisions over the children medically, as well as one another, right?
Hmm.
Um, yeah, it's a little hard. I've seen in my practice so many people that just for healthcare decisions, right? I'm going to use my grandmother as the example. She lived with my Uncle Al for 40 years. That
Hmm.
was like my grandfather. I knew no different, and they
Yeah.
just weren't formally married.
Hmm.
Well, when he got sick in his late 80s, she couldn't make any medical decisions for
Hmm.
him, right? So here come his kids who I mean, I grew up with him every Sunday eating pierogies. We're a big family, we're a big Polish family, and I've never seen them.
Yeah.
And they're making decisions over the man that she loved and cared for into his
Hmm.
80s. Um, so a lot of it is protection. And
Yeah.
so I think a lot of it is one conversation. Two, if you can't say it, then map it out, right? You
Hmm.
don't need a big flip chart on the dining room table. You can actually just do a quick inventory of things that you have, flows of income, so that the other person can just be aware, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes you have to be really vulnerable and honest about
Hmm.
that. And then truly get professional help where you need it, whether that is through a trusted attorney to do a prenup, whether it's a trusted attorney to just do an updated will with
Hmm.
guardianship, executorship, power of attorneys, or whether it is actually someone to help guide that conversation, a financial planner or a counselor, family marriage counselors, they really get excited when it's a healthy, growing new
Hmm.
relationship coming in, asking, like, hey, give us some tips on how we can talk better about money or bigger
Yeah.
decisions with the kids, versus so many of them here in Philadelphia are trying to keep marriages together,
Yeah.
right? Like instead of
Hmm.
trying to open that communication. And when we refer someone out to like a marriage and family counselor, and it's in a good way, they're very excited and thankful for that recommendation.
Yeah. Sure, I
Um,
think it's just a different conversation because it's like when you have two people that are working together on the common goal and they're excited about it, I think that that's something that you can accomplish so
yeah,
much faster.
yeah.
And so I think that just might be unique, and I think
Well,
that's why we like working with, I like working with people who maybe are looking at, okay, we're here now, but we want to do this business. We want to move here. We have all these big dreams and goals. And I think that's exciting because you kind of get some of that, you can kind of feel that
it's the
when we're
energy
doing
of
the
it.
work. Yeah, you feel that
Yeah.
energy and it's like, okay, let's see how we can all work together on this and get things done. I think that's a good idea. And you mentioned prenups. Is that something that you recommend or that you seriously think people should consider, even if it's not the most romantic of words? I think a lot of times I believe that it is
Mhm.
important
Yeah.
because it's kind of like any other business decision that you're making. You are combining, your financial lives and things like that. So I think they're important. But what is your take on them? And, should everybody consider it, or is it really in certain situations?
Um, I am a big fan of them. When I talk about like mapping out mine, yours, ours,
Hmm.
theirs, right? That was actually the framework for our prenup. We
Hmm.
have one, right? Because I had assets that I wanted to protect from my late husband
Hmm.
for my children, right? And I'm not saying protect like Jim's going to run in and take it from them, but what if something happens, right? Like, who knows? Like,
Hmm.
that's one thing, the uncertainty in life, you don't
Hmm.
know, right?
Yeah.
But it was almost like that framework, and it was very easy. We just took it to an attorney, both of us, and we're just like, hey, this look good? Okay.
Mhm.
And it was more like what was mine coming in, what was his coming in. Anything we grew together as a couple was ours. And that's it. And making sure that we protected one another with life insurance,
Hmm.
right? So he actually took a step back from his career to help support mine. So he's got a really good life insurance policy if something
Hmm.
happens to me, right?
Yeah.
To make sure that my income is replaced because he took a break from his own
Hmm.
marketplace to be part of our firm. And that was part of the discussions,
Yeah.
not just with the prenup, but with how are we going to structure this?
Hmm.
Some people don't like the prenups because of the emotional context to
Hmm.
it. You think I'm going to leave, you don't have faith in
Hmm.
the marriage. So it's not really about, I don't say it, I say it's not really about like protecting mine and yours. It's literally about understanding the parameters of how we're going to grow what we have together.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's almost like
Yeah.
where are the roots of this to grow the tree?
Hmm.
So
I think
Okay.
that's important. I do think that maybe sometimes that is a conversation that, sometimes, first marriages and newlyweds are like, oh my gosh, no, we can never think of it. Or sometimes when I'm talking to people who have experienced, a divorce, there's almost more of a, yeah, things do happen. This is more like, this makes sense because
Yeah.
they've lived through some things. And so I do think that it isn't necessarily like a bad, I think there's too many situations where, yeah, things aren't necessarily done the way they'd want. And you're right. Some other family members are now making important decisions, or the money is going somewhere where we don't think that would have been
Yeah.
where they wanted it to be. And so that's a tough situation because there's very little you can do if the law says this is what happens. And that's what happens in the case when there's no legal documents kind of saying what you did want to happen. So
Yeah.
very important. And also, you can put as much emotion behind it as you want to, or you can look at it as just another thing that you're doing and taking care of, kind of like getting the life insurance policy.
Yeah.
Not
And I always say
romantic.
too,
It's
it's
good.
not. I always refer to like our prenup as the ability to protect our relationships outside of us. Because I
Yeah.
will tell you, like for me, I came from widowhood. For Jim, he came from divorce. And my extended family was very protective of me through that whole
Hmm.
widowhood journey. And they're very protective of whether it's their business or not,
Hmm.
what am I doing with the legacy that my late husband left for me and the kids? Now, that's what it's been said to me. The legacy is a life insurance policy that kept us afloat, right? Okay. But at the same time, like if they needed to hear the extended family of Jim and I talked about it, we have our state documents, we have a prenup, everything is free, like everything is very clear and fair.
Hmm.
That's all the extended family and friends needed to not worry. That's it.
Right. That's
Right.
all.
And so they don't look as the second marriage as like, someone's trying to get into her, like, no,
Mhm.
right? Like it's like, oh, okay. They took care of that. Done.
Yeah.
Done.
Yeah. No, I think that's a good perspective. And I think that is a great way to kind of frame it, to be like, no, we've already discussed this. We worked through it. Everything is good. Because you're right. We do a lot of speculating
Yeah.
when we're thinking,
Everyone likes to talk in the
oh,
car on
everybody
the way
likes to
home
kind
from
of figure
Christmas.
out what's happening and, oh, this must be their motivation. And sometimes it's just like, well, no, it's been handled and everyone's eyes are wide open and, oh, okay.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that kind of ends that conversation for people. I wanted to ask you, what are some of the common mistakes that you see? And this could be for people entering, widowhood or with the blended families. Are there any things that you think that after doing the work that you've done and writing the books that people should be very mindful of that they might not be thinking about now, because either you've made the mistake or you've seen other people go through certain things that could have been avoided?
Yeah, I mean, the big one, I think I almost just touched on it with the extended family, the
Yeah.
people that you care for. You are so vulnerable many of times in widowhood or post-divorce, because yeah, you've just lost half of everything
Mhm.
many of times, or all of those future dreams. And sometimes you overshare, right? And
Mhm.
or people are there to help and they are very willing to help. But all of a sudden they know all of your assets, they know all of your flows of income. They know some of your stubborn weak points. They know what makes you cry pretty easy, right? Um, and sometimes that's not the best knowledge for other people to have, right? So you can lose some of your privacy by oversharing.
Mhm.
That it might be feel very comfortable and protective in the beginning, but 3 to 5 years later, mm, like it's hard. It's hard for
Mhm.
everyone to be in your business. So I always say like find one or two confidants, those trusted souls
Mhm.
that might go with you for a visit to go interview a financial advisor, an accountant, an estate attorney, to go with you and hold your hand if you have to go to Social Security in person. Okay, but make sure that's a trusted person that you've talked to them about keeping this information private.
Yeah. That is such an important point. I've definitely seen that with divorce and with other situations where there've been even couples that have gotten back together. And after,
Yeah.
yeah, it really depends on, who you trust with all of the information that you're sharing. Do you really want everyone knowing how much money is it can be, because everyone might be offering to listen and to help, but I think you're right, having a few people, because it might not be something that everybody needs to know or be aware of. It might not be your closest people might not be the ones you should be taking advice from in certain
Mm.
situations.
We call that
Might
Uncle
not,
Bobby.
yeah,
Uncle
Uncle Bobby
Bobby
might not
might not be
know.
it.
He might not know what you should be doing in this situation. Or he might be thinking about what would be best for him in that situation. And he might be decades older, different, different space in life, different
Yeah.
financial position, and all of those things. So I think that's a great tip to have people find the people they trust in their circle. And even if it's not their best friend or their sibling or whoever, find the person that can actually um, give you good advice and keep your confidence. I think is super important.
Yeah.
So you're a speaker now and a
Yep.
podcast host and an author. What has been the most rewarding part of educating families about financial transitions for you?
I think for me, it's been putting these resources out there. So even if someone is not ready to sit down with a full financial planner, or they don't think, I mean, I come from a blue collar background, Philadelphia firefighter, and I would never have pictured myself growing up sitting with a financial advisor at 25, like before I was going to go move abroad.
Mhm.
And I was actually one of my neighbors that pushed me to it. She's like, "You're at your wheelhouse." Like we were just very used to being able to cover the budget. Right?
Mhm.
Like that was it. And so to be able to put resources out there that people can gather and get educated on and at least ask good questions if they ever had the opportunity to sit down with an advisor or an estate attorney. But sometimes like you just need that like downloadable resource to sit at the table and be like, all right, this is our personal document locator. Let me see where all your passwords are. That little document locator getting the passwords starts that conversation. So
Yeah.
just having those tools out there has been so rewarding. And when you see someone come in with, okay, as I've noticed, I talk about flip charts, love big flip charts, love like big markers. And yes, we can use tech to do it better than me.
Mhm.
But when you see a client come in or even a friend and they like are unfolding this giant 3 foot by 2 foot flip chart piece of paper because that's the part of the financial plan that made a difference, or they took notes when you were speaking and it was on a napkin, like
Mhm.
at a luncheon, and you see them come in with that, that's when you kind of knew you made a difference. Like
Yeah.
you tapped into the way they would receive the information. And by
Yes.
doing like you do, podcasts and books
Mhm.
and TV shows, you're making yourself and these tools available to whatever way they absorb it best. And that's been fantastic. I love that.
Yeah, no, I think that is, it doesn't take much. I feel like I had somebody who said like, "Hey, actually, I raised my fees and all my clients continue to work with me and now I'm making X more or I got a raise." And I'm like, That'll keep me going for like another solid decade." Like, I'm good.
There
Okay.
you
Like,
go.
like
Peace out.
perfect. All right. Like it's funny how, certain things are like you said, even with the book, even if it gets you to ask a question
Yeah.
to yourself a little differently, to rethink something that maybe has been ingrained. Like maybe you're like, we're blue collar people, we pay the bills, we get by. And then you're like, something made you think could be a little different. And like whatever
Yeah.
that point was, it's enough to kind of change the whole trajectory of things, which is just something that everybody, everybody has their own life experience and goes through. So I think it's great to just, to be able to put that information out there, share it with people in whatever format they
Yeah.
choose to accept it
That's
and
it.
help people. I think it's fabulous. So how can people find your book and or your podcast if they want to learn about working with you or more about your work?
Yeah, definitely. That is Donna Jean Kendrick. All of the ladies in my family, we all have rhyming names. So my mom's Marlene, my sister's Charlene, my aunt is Irene, and I was Donna Jean.
Donna
So
Jean.
there you go. Now you'll remember it. I went by Donna for the longest time. I dropped that Jean when I got to college, and now it's back. And I will thank the executor of my will for telling my husband that that was truly how she knew me growing up. She's like, "You mean Donna Jean over here?" He's like, "Excuse me." Oh, like all 6 kids, they don't call me mom or stepmom. They refer to me as DJ. Like
DJ.
even the teachers refer to me as DJ. So there you go.
I love it.
DonnaJeanKendrick.com. That will get you all the books, all the free downloadable resources, links to the podcast, and just let me love you up over there. That's
Oh,
it.
thank you so much for sharing your work, your story, and the information on how to find you and follow you. I think that, the information you're putting out there, it is not just for people in blended families. It's not just, these are tips that you can use. Really, anybody can use to get more organized, even if you're making a plan and that person who has your passwords is your best friend or something.
Yeah.
Getting these things taken care of will mean that, your wishes, what you want to happen. I mean, families are looking really different these days. I mean, it could just be a matter of letting the state decide what happens with everything you've worked for, or you. So
Or
I
not.
think that these tips are super, super helpful, super universal for a lot of people. So thank you so much for coming on the show. And if you're looking to catch up on more episodes of the podcast, please head over to mistylynch.com. That's where you can find episodes of the podcast, the show, or order a copy of the book if you want to ask yourself some money mindset questions just about yourself, if you're trying to get those financial questions answered, or maybe think a little bit differently this year about your money. So thank you everyone so much for joining, and we'll talk again next week.
Thanks, Misty.
Don't forget to share with friends and family, and together let's demystify the world of money. Knowledge is the key to financial empowerment.